Hey guys, so back again for another episode here. So thanks to everybody that actually submitted their topics. Okay, people sent some really cool ideas through. So I'm going to start with one of the simpler ones, and that is just what we can expect on competition day and what a competition environment is actually like, and especially as a coach that is looking to manage multiple athletes, what I believe the best way or is the best way to actually go about managing that, and just some of the things we need to consider both as a coach and as an athlete. I have competed, not the most times ever, but I think 7, 8 times now. It's a decent amount, and each of those times I try to look at some different things. I look at certainly what I could have done differently, what would have made that process a little better for me, what would have improved some outcomes, and how could I essentially not try to control everything, but how can I improve my approach to coaching in the same way that whenever we have a competition, I try to think, okay, how could that have been better? How could some of the things that I look at as a coach actually have contributed to a better outcome for my lifters? And so I'm going to split this into three sections, which is managing expectations for your own coaching as well as for your athletes. So managing athlete expectations, managing coach expectations on the day. Number two would be managing your athlete, as in managing your lifter, what they have to consider and what you have to really be thinking about in terms of like what is actually happening on the day. And then third will be managing the outcome. So whether it was good or bad, whether it was what you wanted or what, maybe something that fell short of that, how do we start to actually turn that into something meaningful that we can use to propel that lifter into future success? So managing expectations is a really big one, and that's the reason why I actually wanted to start with it. So the first idea that I actually want to cover here is that your estimated 1RM doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. And that's going to seem really odd because a lot of people will use their E1RM, their estimated 1RM, to start to influence their decision-making process on the day. And I really think that that's pretty backwards, because you can't take a virtual number like an estimate. And again, we're never going to be incredibly precise. We're always going to be working with estimates to some degree. We're working with percentages, but then we also have to factor in that sort of like human experience, like how is that going to change things on the day? Have you slept as well as you could have? Have you had a stressful week? Were you eating normally? Did you change your diet? There's so many variables that go into what we need to consider in our decision-making process on the day, that we can't just assume that the estimated 1RM is in any way accurate. Like I've never actually seen anybody hit their estimated 1RM like bang on the day. I don't think I have anyway, because for the most part, you really need to change and reassess what you're going to be hitting in any competition environment. Like I can think of one meet that I've ever had where everything went to plan, where just everything fell into place. One meet out of 8. And so that should really start to tell you that your estimated 1RM, while it's cool, doesn't really have much of a place in reality, right? It's kind of like, what is it? I being the square root of -1. Like it's a placeholder, right? So you can't really base too much of what you actually want to be hitting off of that, because it's really just going to lead you down a rabbit hole. What you need to consider, and what formulas don't consider, like I said, is it really cold? Is it really hot? Are you tired? Are you over caffeinated, under caffeinated? Are you hungry? Are you dehydrated? The formulas are never going to be able to actually give that to you. So the first thing you want to be doing is just simply understanding that as much as your estimated 1RM might say something, it's not evidence. It's a data point, but it's not evidence, right? It's just it's theoretical understanding of what your performance could be. So the next question you need to ask yourself is, what do you actually have evidence for? What efforts make makes sense and what efforts actually represent a PR. So everybody talks about strength training being a long-term pursuit, right? And it very much is. I always look at that. I try to get my lifters to understand that strength training is a long-term pursuit. Now, everybody wants 5, 10, 15 kilo PRs. They feel great. When you finally do hit them and it's a big PR, you feel like you've really earned it. You've done something incredible. But does a 2 kilo PR feel worse than a 15 kilo PR? I don't actually think it feels worse. I just think that the 15 kilo PR feels better only in hindsight. It's only when we have the ability to actually go after the meet and say, wow, that felt amazing, I can't believe I did that we actually start to look at that as being like a more significant outcome than, say, a 2 kilo PR. Because at the end of the day, a PR is a PR, right? A PR is still going to be a representation of how much effort and work you put in to your competition prep. And it's still going to be representative of you having made progress. So it's only in hindsight that we start to really build up this idea that our PRs have to be absolutely massive. I don't think it's actually true when we're looking at them in the moment. And so I take the opinion that I would much rather go for what we have evidence for, what actually makes sense on the day and what will allow us to build the single best total, rather than pushing for what we think the estimated 1RM says, or simply just pushing for what we want. You can't push for what you want. You have to push for what you've earned, right? What actually makes sense to be on the bar, what should be on the bar on that day. And so this is where we start to discuss the idea of the 100% shot. What is your guaranteed outcome? And regardless of what you want, your 100% shot is the lift that you can absolutely make. A lot of the time, I would actually encourage our lifters to be hitting 2 kilo PRs consistently across all 3 lifts, then try to go for broke on a 5 to 10 kilo PR and miss. I would much rather see somebody lock in a 2 kilo PR than miss a 10 kilo PR. Because if you miss, you never got it. All right. So in that case, in hindsight, that 2 kilo PR is suddenly looking really good. So consider what your 100% shot is. And again, we're not only looking at winning the meet by building the best possible total, which means you have to get as many successful lifts strung together as possible, but we should also look at this meet as building a baseline for future performance in your next meet. So how is that actually going to reflect on your ability to take this performance and build on top of that? What are you going to be able to learn? Well, for that to happen, you need more reliable data points, right? You need a more reliable baseline of performance, and that's only going to come from successful lifts. I would still argue that missed lifts are data, but if you're missing a lift because you tried to go for a 15 or 20 kilo PR, you won't know if you had the 2 or 5 kilo PR in the bag, because it's such a broad sort of cross section of weight that's potentially been missed there. And so it just starts to muddy the water. It starts to really introduce a lot of noise when we're trying to find the signal. So just managing the expectations there of what the performance should be and what the win condition should be is really important there. And you need to be willing as a lifter to check your ego and just simply follow what the process ought to be. And as a coach, you need to be firm but understanding. You need to understand that people still want to lift heavy. It's still going to seem more important to them. It still seems more important to all of us, really, because we're powerlifters and we want to make the number go up. But we have to be firm but understanding, right? You have to explain it to your lifters in a very logical, concise way that this is the plan. And so important to remember, as always, is that totals win meets, okay? Like, totals win this competition. It's not PRs, because you could hit a massive squat PR and then be so tanked from that you bomb your bench or miss your final dead and end up walking away with a subpar total. I have definitely seen people hit huge PRs on specific lifts, but no longer have enough energy in the tank to be able to sort of spread out their effort across the day. And we really have to remember that it is a long day. So if the PR is there and you have evidence for it and makes sense, by all means, go for it. But we have to manage the expectation about the importance of the PR versus the importance of the win. I would rather push for the win than the PR. So when you compete to win. Don't just compete to PR, and also don't assume that PRs mean you will win. Okay, because you have to be smarter than that. You have to be more strategic than that when it actually comes to winning in powerlifting.